a silent frequency began broadcasting. Inside a concrete bunker, tape spun. It carried no weapons, only a secret, shared dialect, forcing sworn enemies to understand. If peace is built on deception, the truth lies within the unseen cables buried deep beneath a blood-soaked earth. For 70 years, the border between these two nations was not just a line on a map. It was a jagged, bleeding scar. To cross it was death. To speak across it was treason. Yet, deep within an encrypted digital node, a rogue server began to hum. It did not broadcast military propaganda. It did not deliver political ultimatums. Instead, it quietly hijacked the internet connections of two deeply hostile, warring populations. It invited them to a place with no names, no flags, no history. Just two voices speaking a language that did not belong to either of them. This is the story of an anonymous digital architect, an ordinary coder who engineered a brilliant, highly dangerous linguistic trap. He forced mortal enemies to fall in love before they even realized who they were talking to. It was a high-stakes psychological experiment. If they discovered each other's true identities, the fragile peace would shatter instantly. But if the deception held, it would prove that geopolitical hatred is not inherent. It would prove that hatred is merely a fragile, synthetic construct, and that it can be dismantled by a single, engineered, linguistic bridge. This is the unedited account of the day the digital masks fell, and the terrifying, beautiful moment two enemies realized they had already become best friends. It began with a silent war on the airwaves. In a highly volatile, war-torn region, the state did not just control the physical land. They controlled the mind. Firewalls blocked all digital traffic from across the militarized border. Keyword filters immediately flagged and deleted any message containing foreign scripts. But in the winter of 2014, a quiet anomaly appeared on the network. An underground digital signal began bypassing the strict government firewalls. It did not use the standard internet protocols. Instead, it rode on the back of abandoned radio frequencies and modified peer-to-peer networks. It was a digital back door. And it was built by a single, anonymous programmer working out of a cluttered bedroom. He called his creation the Signal. It was designed to do one thing: connect people from opposing sides of the conflict. But the architect knew that simply connecting them was not enough. If a citizen from country A met a citizen from country B, the conversation would end in violence within seconds. The historical trauma was too deep. The nationalistic programming was too strong. So, the creator designed a digital filter. He stripped away their real names, their IP addresses, and their locations. He gave them neutral, digital avatars. But his most radical move was not hiding their identities. It was controlling how they spoke. Wait, what if the entire system wasn't hosted on a high-tech dark web matrix, but run off a modified, old 1990s gaming server lobby? Specifically, a classic Counter-Strike 1.6 server that the military's own radar technicians used to play on during their night shifts. By routing the proxy through the very nodes the military used for recreation, the programmer guaranteed his signal could never be blocked without the military shutting down its own off-duty entertainment networks. Who was this shadowy operator running this digital bypass? And what was his ultimate motive? Was he a peace activist or a rogue hacker playing a dangerous game with human lives? To find out, we have to look at the code itself. A code written to trick the human brain into forgetting its oldest grudges. A code that forced them to use a language that had never existed before. To bypass the hatred, the architect realized he had to bypass the words themselves. Language is a weapon. When we speak, we do not just convey information. We convey historical trauma, pride, and division. If you speak Arabic or Hebrew, Russian or Ukrainian, Hindi or Urdu, the very sounds carry the weight of 1,000 battles. Every noun is a potential landmine. Every verb is an accusation. So, the architect did something unthinkable. He built an entirely new, custom dialect. He strips the participants' native languages down to a bare, emotion-first vocabulary. He created a digital dictionary of only 80 words. And he did not include any words for enemy, borders, history, or war. Those concepts literally could not be typed. If a user tried to type a weaponized word, the system simply refused to send it. Instead, the vocabulary was limited to primary human experiences: cold, warmth, fear, hope, share, listen. Wait, what made this dialect even more bizarre was that it wasn't just written. The software used a real-time vocal shaping engine that stripped away the regional accents of the speakers entirely. Whether you were a high-ranking officer or an uneducated civilian, your voice was synthesized into the exact same neutral, soothing, accentless tone. If a user attempted to shout a nationalistic slur, the software didn't just mute them. It replaced the audio signal with the calm, rhythmic sound of a beating human heart. What happens to the human brain when you completely remove its armor? When you cannot ask someone where they are from, or what side of the wall they sleep on? When you have no words to describe your anger, you are forced to describe your sadness. The participants were disarmed. They were left naked in a digital room, holding only the words for hurt and tomorrow. It was a forced simplification of the soul. And it was about to be tested on the two most unlikely subjects imaginable. In the spring of 2015, the system made a connection that should have ended in tragedy. It paired two users. User Alpha was an active-duty soldier stationed in a concrete guard tower along the border. His days were spent looking through high-magnification optics, scanning the hills of the enemy country for targets. User Beta was a young civilian living in a city just 15 miles past those hills. A city that had been repeatedly shelled by Alpha's military unit. On paper, they were locked in a zero-sum game of life and death. If they met in the physical world, one of them would likely pull a trigger. But on the server, they were just two anonymous voices testing the limits of a strange, quiet space. They used the simplified 80-word dialect. At first, the conversation was clumsy and frustrating. Every time they tried to ask about their locations or their jobs, the screen flashed red. The system forced them back to the basics. So, they began to talk about the weather. They talked about the sound of the wind. They shared how the cold felt on their skin at night. Alpha typed, "Night is cold. Watch the sky." Beta replied, "Night is cold. Hear the sky." They did not realize they were looking at the exact same stars, divided only by a line of barbed wire. But wait, what was truly terrifying was that while Alpha was typing these messages of peace, he was actively writing down coordinate adjustments on his physical artillery notepad. He was whispering digital comfort to a stranger while preparing to launch fire upon her city. He had compartmentalized his life so deeply that he didn't see the contradiction. To him, the person on the screen was a beautiful, disembodied mind. To him, the people under his crosshairs were just targets. Over weeks of intimate sharing, the artificial language became their second nature. They learned to communicate loneliness with incredible precision. But a relationship built on a lie is a fragile thing. How long could this engineered peace last before a slip-up revealed the terrifying truth? The illusion could not hold forever. Human connection is chaotic. It cannot be fully contained by an 80-word lexicon or a digital filter. 6 weeks into their daily conversations, the system suffered a minor latency spike. The audio compression failed for a fraction of a second, and in that split second, a sound slipped through the digital barrier. It was not a word. It was a distant, high-pitched wail, an air raid siren. In Alpha's headphones, the faint rising and falling pitch of the siren echoed from Beta's microphone. It was an air raid warning that Alpha's own military unit had triggered just moments prior. It was a sound he knew intimately. It was the sound of his side attacking her side. The realization hit Alpha like a physical blow. The person he had been sharing his deepest fears with was not a distant stranger. They were on the direct receiving end of his military's wrath. They were the enemy. Beta heard the sudden silence on the other end of the line. She asked, "Are you here?" Wait, what made this moment even more excruciating was that Alpha didn't just hear the siren. He heard the faint, dull thud of his own unit's outgoing mortar fire over his left shoulder, followed exactly 3 seconds later by the tiny, crackling explosion through Beta's headset on his right ear. He was hearing his own shells land near her home in real time. His hand began to shake. Alpha's finger hovered micrometers above the glowing red disconnect button on his retro software interface. If he stayed, he was committing treason. If he disconnected, he was abandoning the only person who had truly understood his loneliness. Will he shut down the terminal and report the breach to his commanding officers? Or will curiosity and a strange new affection override a lifetime of nationalistic programming? Alpha did not press the button. But the architect behind the server saw the traffic spike. He knew the moment of truth had arrived. The experiment had reached its terminal velocity. It was time to strip away the digital camouflage and force them to face the reality of who they were. The creator did not warn them. With a single keystroke, he initiated a global system override. The synthetic voice modulation was abruptly deactivated. The physical webcams were forced active. The green code on their screens vanished. In its place, a high-definition video feed flicker-started into life. Complete, suffocating silence fell over the network. All background music was removed. There was only the sound of heavy breathing and the low hum of computer fans. Two faces stared at each other in absolute frozen shock. Alpha saw a young woman sitting in a darkened room, her face pale, the ruins of a shelled building visible through her window. Beta saw a young man in a crisp military uniform, sitting in a concrete bunker, his country's national emblem pinned to his chest. The flags of their warring nations were clearly visible in the backgrounds of their video feeds. Everything they had been taught to hate was staring back at them. Wait, what made this unmasking completely insane was that the creator didn't trigger it out of scientific curiosity. He did it because his physical location was being raided by state security forces at that very second. Knowing his servers were about to be confiscated and his life's work erased, his final act of desperation was to force a raw, unmoderated, peer-to-peer connection between his users, leaving them exposed to each other before the signal went dark forever. This was the moment of maximum danger. Would they scream? Would they curse? What was the very first sentence spoken when the deception was stripped away? They did not scream. Beta looked at the uniform. She looked at the face of the soldier who belonged to the army that had destroyed her neighborhood. And then she spoke in her native tongue. She said, "You are so young." Alpha, his voice cracking under the weight of his uniform, replied in his own language. He said, "I am sorry." They did not use the 80-word dialect anymore. They had their full vocabulary back. But they did not use it to fight. They used it to weep and to ask questions that had no easy answers. The engineered language had done its job too well. It had laid a foundation of pure, unfiltered human empathy that nationalistic programming could not tear down. The experiment did not end with them. The architect's server quickly grew into an underground network. Over the next 5 years, thousands of citizens from both sides of the border found the signal. They used the same custom stripped-down language to build friendships that their governments could not trace. Wait, what's truly mind-blowing is that this digital dialect didn't stay online. Soldiers and civilians began spray painting the physical symbols of this 80-word language onto the concrete border walls and military checkpoints themselves. It became a silent, physical graffiti code. When a soldier on guard duty saw a specific symbol painted on a rock, they knew the civilian on the other side was part of the network, silently agreeing not to shoot. It was a shadow peace movement, operating entirely in the dark corners of the internet. An encrypted network of enemies who chose to speak to each other without weapons. Is this rogue signal still broadcasting today in the shadows of the web? Or has the state finally found a way to silence the frequency forever? We are taught to believe that hatred is an ancient, permanent force. We are taught that borders are real, physical barriers written into the very fabric of the earth. But this experiment proved something far more terrifying to those in power. Hatred is incredibly fragile. It is an artificial construct that requires constant maintenance, massive propaganda, and a heavily weaponized vocabulary to survive. When you strip away the language of war, the human heart default runs on connection. Peace does not require a pen on a treaty. It does not require politicians to shake hands on a global stage. It simply requires the courage to look at your enemy, strip away your armor, and speak without weapons. Somewhere in the digital ether, the signal is still broadcasting, a silent frequency, waiting for those brave enough to listen, waiting for those brave enough to understand.